Madam Speaker, I had the privilege of answering a clarification from Mr. Leon Pereira towards the end of the debate. And he specifically asked me whether we would consider the recommendations in the Constitutional Commission to make sure that election methods were not politicized. Election methods were such that the process were not politicized, and referred to a speech made by Madam Rahayu. I don't have the Hansard with me, but I stood up and I remember that I agreed with Mr. Leon Pereira that indeed we should look at these things, and we would do so during the coming, where we enact the processes in this bill. And indeed, that's what we're doing. And I'm glad that Mr. Pereira agreed with me at that point in time.
I thank the Minister for sharing that extract from Hansard. But I think even as your own extract makes clear, and referring back to the debate that DPM Teo cited, I did not support the idea of an elected presidency and making procedural changes to reduce the politicization risk in that election. I and my colleagues argued for the idea of a non-elected, an appointed president, because we argued and we still maintain that if you have an election, inevitably that politicization risk will emerge. There are various scenarios. I think one of them was touched on in that extract, but inevitably there will be that risk. You can introduce procedural changes to campaign rules and so on and so forth, and Minister Chan has shared some of those procedural changes today, but you will not eliminate that procedural risk. That is why we argued then and we argue now that an appointed president, like we had in the past, like President Yusof Ishak, is the best solution for Singapore.
DPM? Yeah.
Madam Speaker, I was very, very clear on that day, and I think the Hansard speaks for itself. And when I agreed with Mr. Leon Pereira, he was listening to me very attentively. And we all know that Mr. Pereira, how shall I say, is not shy to stand up to clarify a matter if he has not agreed with it at that point in time. And at that point in time, when I agreed with him that we should make processes to depoliticize the election of the president, he did not respond at that point in time.
I thank the DPM for his comment, but I think the totality of all that I said during the debate does not support a position that we should have an elected president but make procedural changes such as the ones that have been announced today. The position that I articulated then, and I hold the same position now, is that we should revert to an appointed president, because whatever procedural changes you make, you do not eliminate that political risk. So I was not arguing that we should go down the path of procedural changes.
The record for Mr. Leon's edification?
So, yes, DPM. Mr. Pereira, you can sit down.
And I quote, "My second question pertains to a question we have repeated a few times. What are the strategies that the government has to mitigate the risks of politicizing the unifying office of the presidency? No doubt, the politicization may not have fully materialized for the past EPs that we have, but there's good reason to believe in future presidential elections if, let us say, there are 10 candidates and let us say the winner gets 5% of the votes, or let us say the campaign ends up becoming bitterly partisan, the office of the president could be politicized. I have not heard any strategy from any member of the PAP on how this can be managed. And it's quite clear, Madam Speaker, that he's referring to electing the president. I continue in Mr. Leon's word. I think Ms. Rahayu Mazam came closest to that, and to her credit, she talked about tightening up the rules for partisanship during the presidential election campaign. So what would be the government's strategy to mitigate that? That is my second question. And Madam, in my reply to him, I said, turning to the risk of politicization and the possible tightening of rules for the presidential elections, the risk of politicization is there. I've already addressed it explicitly just now in my answer, but I think what Mr. Leon Pereira suggests, and what the Commission suggests also, is to look at the rules and the way that the presidential elections are conducted. I think there's merit, and I agree with Mr. Leon Pereira there. As I said, Madam, Mr. Pereira is not shy to stand up to disagree if he has been understood wrongly, and he did not stand up to disagree with me at that point in time.
Mr. Pereira.
debate, what I did call for was for the government to explain its strategy for managing the politicization risk. And I felt that whatever had been explained up to that point in time was not sufficient safeguards to manage that politicization risk. I alluded to Ms. Rahayu Marzan's comments as being one attempt to explain a strategy, but I pointed to the fact that there had not been a proper strategy explained at that time. And I think some of the procedural changes that have been suggested today are an attempt to manage that politicization risk, but that my statements then cannot be construed to mean that I support an elected presidency with procedural changes. What I'm saying is that an elected presidency inherently has that risk. There is that inevitable tendency. There was no comprehensive strategy to manage that, and you can make procedural changes, you can make tweaks here and there, but at the end of the day, an election still runs the risk of becoming politicized, even if you make all kinds of procedural changes. That is why an appointed presidency is still a better solution, and the Constitution Commission itself actually pointed that out. My statements in the November debate did not constitute a support of an elected presidency with procedural safeguards.
Madam, I thanked Mr. Leon Pereira for agreeing that we should have political safeguards at that debate. He did not clarify. I thank him again for agreeing that we should have political safeguards.